Good morning. I'm Scott Kirsner, editor and co-founder of Innovation Leader, and we're really glad you could join us for today's webcast. Innovation Leader, if you're not already a member, is an information resource and community for executives who work in R&D, product development, strategy, and corporate innovation roles. We reach more than 10,000 innovation executives at public companies every week, and we're focused relentlessly on helping them move the needle. I should note that Innovation Leader is run by journalists, and we don't provide any consulting, software, or services that could impact our ability to serve readers in an unbiased, independent way. So thanks for being part of the Innovation Leader community. And with me here today in Boston is Ben Einstein, the managing director of Bolt, which is an early stage seed fund focused exclusively on hardware startups. Among Bolt's investors are Cisco, Autodesk, and Logitech. And in addition to seed capital, Bolt invests full-time staff, shop equipment, and extensive expertise with manufacturing and commercialization. And before starting Bolt, Ben ran Brainstream Design, a product design and development consultancy here in Massachusetts. Last month in June, he was one of the speakers at Innovation Leader's Connected Products Strategy Offsite, where we only had a little bit of time to start discussing some of the business models for connected products. So we wanted to line up this webcast to dive a little deeper into that topic. Ben, thanks for being here.
Happy to be here.
All right, or thank you for letting us come into your space since since we're in Bolt today.
Totally.
But let's talk about kind of some of the business models you see emerging. And this is a space that we think a lot of big companies, whether they make physical products or they're just in services, are really interested in. So if you have questions throughout and you're tuned in, we're watching the chat interface, so ask questions or if something doesn't seem clear, and go right ahead.
Cool. Yeah, great. So I think, we've seen lots of companies, especially larger companies, trying to pivot away from the sort of quote unquote traditional sort of hardware, 20-30% gross margin sale. And as we're sort of at the center of these sort of connected hardware companies, I've always found it helpful to kind of think through some of the reasons why this is changing, and then some of the examples of companies that have sort of made that transition and why they're interesting. And so this is a talk I've given a couple of times, which I think a couple of the folks at the conference wanted to hear more about. So I think the sort of main reason, I can just go hit the next button. There you go. The main driving reason around what's changing these business models is actually that hardware itself has really changed fundamentally. And I really use the example, sort of oft-used example of thermostats, which I think is pretty compelling, for what that used to look like. And if you take a look at the next slide here, you have sort of a standard old school, Honeywell thermostat that would, sell at Home Depot for whatever, $49. There's probably a 20 or 30 points of margin there going to Honeywell, maybe a little bit more depending on the features and the models and such. And over time, the value for the customer looks sort of like this. And so you have this buyer journey where a customer is walking into a store. Maybe they've done a little bit of research before on the web or in other sort of agencies. They then walk in and start sort of thinking about and potentially making a buy decision. And the value is steadily starting to increase as they actually sort of take this product to their home, set it up, and start to use it. And usually over time, whether this is sort of actual or just psychological, the value of that product tends to decrease as the feature set stays sort of stagnant. And so, typical consumer electronic companies have an EOL sort of end of life of, somewhere in the sort of 18 months to 24 months time frame, where they're starting to think about how do I get back to that customer to sell them another version of a new product. And
interestingly, I think in the traditional world of consumer electronics, unless you filled out the warranty card and told them who you are,
it's really hard to figure that out.
The manufacturer has no idea who you are, where you live, how you're using the product.
That's right. And so from a business model standpoint, you're actually paying the cost of acquisition again for that customer. And so it's actually this very, very inefficient process, which I think for at least the startups that we look at is really dying. And We have very few companies that operate this way. We've made, I think, about 37 investments now. I think 1 or 2 of them sort of have this business model. So it's really unusual. And so I sort of contrast that with Nest, which I think everybody knows now. This is a little bit of a tried and true example, but has a sort of lifetime sort of expectation curve that looks really different. The beginning is similar, and you're going through the exploration process, the shopping, and then the actual purchase decision. It's actually pretty in line with the standard hardware product from sort of the early buyer journey up until the sale. But it starts to change once the product is actually in the user's hands. And so if you've ever set up a Nest before, you realize that the process is very different than a standard thermostat process. They include a screwdriver. They have a level that's built into the wall mounting bracket. You have this really interesting, carefully designed feel that is expensive in the beginning, but they are sort of betting against the long-term value of the product and are able to afford a little bit higher cost of goods. And so the expectation there is actually the EOL process is not built into the product itself, and that the value actually steadily increases over time. Now with Nest and with many other products that we work on, that comes from software. And so as an example, Nest will change the user interface. They might change colors or add an additional feature, a different kind of control setting, or a sensor that was off is now on. There are all kinds of things that companies do to provide this sort of perception of increased value over time. And it really does change the perception of the consumer, even if they go out, 6 months later, 2 years later, whatever, and buy another version of that product. Oftentimes they have a higher NPS score of the product over time, which is kind of surprising to many folks.
And because Nest is connected to a smartphone app, do they use that at all as a marketing channel to say, hey, we now make a smoke detector, and maybe you'd consider buying that? Or
all the time. Yeah. So they do it in, again, you have to think about it from I'm a big believer in sort of product psychology and how people think about products. And you really have to think about these things through the perspective of, what is really benefiting the end customer. And so I think it's pretty crappy when companies send random emails, hey, we came out with this new thing, you should buy it. Mm-hmm. But it's really effective when you send an email once a month saying, hey, this is how much energy you used. You saved, X amount of kilowatt hours over your neighbor who has a crappy Honeywell thermostat. And by the way, we have this new product that's coming out. Mm-hmm. And I think that way of presenting information and value to the user just changes the psychology when they're reading that email. It's not, oh, this is a marketing email. It's, oh, look at this interesting thing I just learned. Mm-hmm. And it's this positive reinforcement around the psychology of the product that they've already purchased. And then it's also an opportunity to be able to market to that person. Yeah. But I think companies that just treat it as a marketing channel usually wind up sort of feeling I think their customers often feel sort of marketed to. And it's very like, you're talking at me rather than we're having a conversation about why this product is better for me. Yeah, cool. And so I think the personalization there is really important. I think we talked about this before. I find this really one of the most effective ways to think about sort of modern hardware companies, and sort of see this image of a Trojan horse, and inside is the software bits. And that's really what powers, again, many of these companies that we look at, and which are really the sort of bedrock of the sort of newer connected hardware sort of movement. Really, whether they sell it to the end user or not, software is a huge part of how they run that business. I love to talk about this company that a lot of people don't know, unless you're a pretty dorky engineer, called Proto Labs. And they make injection mold tools for, sort of engineering companies that are trying to build plastic molded parts. It's an industry that hasn't changed in a very long time, other than be moved, progressively westward across the globe. Mm-hmm. But they use software to optimize the process of machining and testing and actually molding parts. And it helps, turn the company from a, crappy, 1 times revenues type value to, I think they're currently traded at about 4 or 5x revenues. And it really changes the game. And that's just the addition of software to help run the company. And so most users don't even interact with the software that they use. It's just part of the operations. Well, at the event last month, you kind of said one thing you see with startup companies is they're investing so much time and resources in getting the hardware right. And, they're figuring out how to make something. Yeah.
that they kind of give the software side of things short shrift. Do you think
Yeah.
that's true with medium-sized, larger-sized companies too, or do they tend to have a better balance of like, hey, we know we need to hire a software team,
Yeah.
if we're making a robotic lawnmower, which is something we were talking about earlier?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes from the culture and DNA of the company. I think in the startup world, resources are so tight that you don't get to have the software party if you don't have the hardware party and it goes well. And so I think that, young startups, they need to hire, 5 or 6 or 7 people just to manage the hardware because they've never done it before.
Yeah.
If you are at, a company that's traditionally really good at manufacturing hardware, the focus is really trying to figure out how to build software. And a lot of times people really struggle with that because they're not used to it. Culturally, it's a very different process.
We should repeat, the name of the company is Proto Labs.
Proto Labs, yeah. And so it's it's an interesting company. Went public about 3 years ago. Have been performing very well. Again, very dorky, sort of semi-random example of how to take a traditionally low-margin business, injection molding, which is a business that really no one wants to be in the United States, and turn it into a fairly high-margin, publicly traded company. I have to imagine it's one of the very few publicly traded molding companies in the world.
Yeah.
And that's all due to software. And so I think that hardware, sort of traditional hardware companies understanding and adopting software into their culture is a really important and, of course, difficult thing for many companies to do. But we really do view that as that is the reason that the Trojan horse exists, is to be able to insert software into places that it can't currently exist. And hardware is really good at doing that because you can take it out of the context of a screen. And so, iPhones and computers only make sense in certain scenarios, whereas hardware is a thing that we use all the time, all over the place, if you sort of expand the definition to anything. So this is a really important thought, at least in terms of the way we think at Bolt. And then I always find it helpful to go through some of the reasons about why traditional hardware companies have struggled and are dying. I think one of my favorite examples is this company Jawbone, that probably many of you have heard of. It's really an unfortunate story. They've been around for a while, about 15 years. They have really created by themselves 3 huge industries. One was the sort of Bluetooth headset industry, which they really created. They had the reason it's called Jawbone. They had these bone conducting sort of microphones that they used over Bluetooth to communicate with your phone. Really the first company to do that well. They then built this product that you see on the screen here, Jambox, which is this sort of wireless speaker category, which has now become I think a $10+ billion industry in the United States. Came out of nowhere. These guys were the first ones to do it, and then started to work on fitness and are building a product that sort of competes with Fitbit's line of sort of wearable trackers and sort of health and fitness. Unfortunately, Jawbone has lost every single one of these categories, and so they create them, they pump hundreds of millions of dollars into them. They're usually first to market. People traditionally love their products and feel, I think, really compelled by them, and yet they've really struggled to maintain a sort of a strong position in any of these markets. They're number 3, number 4, number 5, and pretty much anything that they do. And the reason for that is commoditization. And with any of these spaces, a bigger company comes in typically with a better brand or even a better team and oftentimes more money and is able to maneuver around them. And so if you look at the speaker market as an example, it doesn't look like this anymore. It really looks like this. And there's so many products from so many companies that are pretty much identical to the Jambox in terms of performance and features and all that other stuff, that it really boils down to brand,
Well, it's interesting. You don't have the Amazon Echo on this slide yet.
No,
I can see, right?
Yeah, no,
and for me, like that's the speaker in my house that has caused me to stop using the Jambox and any other.
Totally.
I probably own 2 or 3 Bluetooth speakers.
But that product is never going to get commoditized, or at least it's much harder for that to happen. Whereas these are, right? This is just a pure hardware business. They do think about, hey, I have a Bluetooth connection in an app.
Yeah.
But that's really not software.
Yeah.
And there's no stickiness to the experience of playing music.
I got to see the guy who runs devices for Amazon speak at a conference last week, and he said part of the game for Amazon and the service, the Alexa service, is that it learns a lot about the users that interact with it.
Totally.
You as a specific user and the kinds of domains that you ask about. Well, you tend to ask about sports a lot, or you tend to ask about weather or news a lot. And for them, the game is to avoid commoditization is, can that service get better for you as a user?
Yeah.
over time, not can we make it cheaper,
Amazon, the Alexa team has 1,000 people on it. The last time I checked, about 6 months ago. I'm sure it's more than that now. You can always tell how much software impacts a product by looking at how many people there are there. And if you look at any of these companies that are selling Bluetooth speakers, there might be one person who's working on software. It's because it's a thing that's baked into the OS layer. You don't need to do that much work to write software application for it. So I think it's just the point here is Jawbone will fail as a company, unfortunately, because they're not able to maintain this sort of sticky experience that's usually built around software. Whereas companies like Beats, on one hand, which has a streaming music service and this hugely profitable brand powered by Dr. Dre and all those other guys, has really dominated the sort of speaker market. The Fitbit folks have really dominated the fitness tracker market. Their brand is all around fitness and health, and Jawbones is all around, hey, we build Bluetooth stuff. It doesn't really resonate with many consumers. So I think commoditization is a really important thing that companies really struggle with to figure out how to defeat. Another example, a little bit orthogonal to this one, is Pebble. And again, a lot of people look at this and think, oh man, this is a smart watch. You can use the Apple Watch too if you want. It's sort of a smart watch product. It's a $150 sort of gross 30-40% gross margin sale consumer electronics product. And that is a wrong way to look at this business. Whether or not these guys are successful, it's hard to say. They're still a relatively small company. It's still pretty early in this game. But they have, I think 150 people, and I think 70 of them are focused on apps, developer relations, software development kits, new apps that they want to build themselves, an app store that they're building. It's all around the software. And so it becomes...
And you think they can compete against Apple in that?
Yeah, I don't know. But I can say that this is not a commoditized industry in the same way that Bluetooth speakers are. This is really around, can you build a platform that people are going to be attracted to and want to build apps for? I think there's a good chance they lose to Apple or some other company. But it is much stickier of an experience. Once you buy a Pebble smartwatch, you're far less likely to switch to a different one.
Right. Because any one of those apps could become essential to your life. You're like, hey, this is this is delivering value to me.
That's right. And so it's really built around the software experience. And so it sounds a little bit almost semantic to sort of talk about this, but they really are fundamentally different. And so we really care a lot about how important software plays a role for many of these companies. And again, if you look at the differences between the Jawbone speaker business and the Pebble watch business, you'll see the tables are really reversed when it comes to software versus hardware in terms of people, and that's a really good indicator for how much they care about that area. The next is sort of engaging users, which I think is something that traditional hardware companies really struggle with. When you sell a thing, it's really hard to maintain a relationship with the user over time if it's just some piece of plastic sitting out in space and you don't really have a connection to them. And sort of as Scott alluded to, and if you don't fill out the warranty card or whatever, they don't even know who you are. Unless they do, focus groups and all kinds of sort of specific things. And so if you look at a company like Fitbit, again, just a sort of random example, there are many, many companies that do this, but in order to use the Fitbit product, you have to, type your email address in. There's an account that's created. You typically are interacting with the product, multiple times, oftentimes for 10, 20 minutes a day. You have all these opportunities as a company to interact with those customers in a way that changes and feels personal to them. And that is, again, highly psychologically motivating thing. When I get an email from Fitbit that tells me, here's my weekly statistics, I've walked this much, this is better than my friends, and connects through Facebook, whatever, that makes me feel compelled to continue to use that product.
And it probably also gives them visibility into people who've bought it, or got it as a gift and used it for 3 weeks and aren't using it anymore. And you can try to sort of reactivate, those ordinarily would probably be users that would not buy the next version of Fitbit.
Absolutely. Right? And they also do the opposite. They look at, man, why are there these 1,500 people that use this thing like none other? And reach out to them. Hey, what is it about this product that really keeps you attracted? And maybe figure out how to move those features to more and more people. So it just gives you this connection to a customer that's really hard to do any other way, and it provides a huge amount of value for the relationship between the company and the consumer. And the third, and probably the most directly obvious to most large companies, is the money. And so this is a company that's now owned by Nest/Google, which I have sort of mixed feelings about. But this product is fantastic. I don't know if you've ever purchased Dropcam. It's one of the, I think, better security cameras that's ever been built. It's super, super simple. They, of course, make money on the initial sale of the product itself. And then they have about a 35% attach rate to this service that people pay, $10 to $15 a month, depending on how much storage you need, just to keep, I think it's either 5 or 10 days or whatever it is, of archives of sort of video footage from the camera itself. And so this is something that, if you do the math, it's an extremely high margin sale after the initial sale that is recurring for probably 18, 24 months.
And are there use cases? I mean, this image seems to suggest there are use cases like recording fun stuff that happens in your house versus somebody broke in while I was on vacation.
People use it for a sort of variety of reasons. And I think it comes because it's so easy to use. Yeah. But one of the things, the reason I use this image when I'm talking about Dropcam is it's really interesting to look at. You have 4 objects in this image. You have the camera, of course. You have a MacBook Pro, whatever it is. And you have an iPhone or mobile phone and a tablet. And you'll notice that the camera is off in the corner in the back, kind of the smallest thing. You don't even really think about it. And again, this goes to highlight how important for many of these companies the sort of software and user experience is. They're really selling this experience of recording a dog or whatever, playing with my kids, and looking at it from these devices rather than you're buying a camera. And it sounds, again, a little bit semantic, but it's so different. And if you look at Dropcam's marketing, they're really selling an experience around, better security or, capture fun moments or don't lose stuff or whatever the thing may be.
Yeah.
And all their marketing is really sort of architected this way. It's not about a camera.
And I think it's going to be interesting. I've just been testing the connected security camera from Canary for a few months. It's going to be interesting because is there one in the room here?
Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure where it is.
Anyway, to me it's interesting because it's almost a telepresence device, right? Like when I'm traveling, you can open up the Canary camera, or it sends you an alert that like, hey, my son and my wife are in the kitchen having breakfast.
Right.
You can watch them, which is a little weird, but it feels like it wants to sort of take that next step to being a device that lets you connect with your family without calling up on FaceTime or sort of scheduling some kind of Skype. Just a persistent portal into your house.
And I don't know if that's going to be part of their strategy, but it makes a lot of sense to have all the pieces there to build that.
Yeah.
But it is really interesting how companies that really understand this are built and market themselves like software companies and experience companies, not hardware companies. And so we really don't invest in companies that build cameras, but we look at and invest in companies that build the experience around the camera all the time.
Yeah.
Even though, of course, building the camera is a really hard thing to do, and it takes a lot of hardware engineers and shipping and logistics and supply chain management and all the stuff that you have to do to build a hardware product is there. But it's sort of under the surface of the company. And so this is a huge thing for us. Again, I would say out of about the 37 or 8 companies that we've invested in, I think about 35 or 36 of them have recurring revenue as not a thing, hey, our investors told us we need recurring revenue, let's add some, as this is a fundamental way the business operates, is structured around recurring revenue. And the reason for that is simple. It's far more valuable from the perspective of sort of enterprise value than a traditional hardware sale. And so we really love companies that sort of fit into that category. And so this is actually a fairly old slide from our first fundraising deck, but I think this is really broad, and this sort of connected sort of hardware, sort of recurring revenue, early user engagement, sort of anti-commoditization sort of movement is going to hit everything. And it already really is in many ways. And so it covers robotics and health and fitness and consumer electronics and 3D printing and manufacturing, all these other things that are sort of built around sort of the software experience as a sort of a new thing. And I think we're going to see this continue to sort of disrupt a huge percentage of sort of the world we live in today. And so a lot of people ask how, and sort of what are the business models that sort of companies use. And so this is sort of a highlight of a handful of business models. Some of them are not that new, but they sort of have a slightly different sort of way of operating in the world. And these are just sort of examples of companies that sort of fall into these. So one is what we call need accessories, or sort of necessary accessories. This is a company in Boston, Rest Devices. And again, there's 20 examples of companies that do this. This
is just the cutest example.
Well, it's a nice little picture with a baby. Yeah. Who doesn't want that? they build a sort of better baby monitor, and the real product that they're selling, aside from the experience of helping parents monitor their kids, is this little green turtle thing that you see there on the onesie. And that's where the intelligence sort of lies. That's where there's a little microprocessor and a wireless radio. That's where sort of all that stuff's going on. That's sort of what people are really spending money on in the beginning. But their business is really built around these onesies, the clothes itself, which have right now you can see the sort of green stripe, sort of set of green stripes that sort of runs across the belly. That's actually where their conductive material is in order to measure things like motion and heart rate for the baby. And there's different patterns and colors and sizes, and you wind up going through these things all the time because they get dirty or sweaty or whatever. And so they're really optimizing for, they want to sell the turtle, but they want to sell the maximum number of these accessories to this product as possible.
And the turtle clips on magnetically or something, so you can put it on.
That's right. And so you can own whatever one of these for every day of the week. You could have 2 kids and use the same one, whatever. And I think it creates this experience where you don't feel bad about, oh man, I just need to buy one of these other things. So this is something that it sort of existed in sort of various forms before. The difference here is that the potential for, again, sort of targeting and marketing and lowering the cost of customer acquisition while maintaining a really high gross margin is really high. And so we sort of we definitely like companies that sort of fit in this category. Next is probably one of the most common that people talk about with recurring revenue, selling content. And so we have a company as one of our portfolio companies called Mural, and we actually have a screen here that's in the other room that we can walk by on the way out if you want. And they sell art. And so on first glance, it looks like this is a 30-inch sort of digital sort of art canvas, they call it. And so you can mount this thing to your wall. You kind of plug it in with the power, and then it displays various artworks that you can buy. In reality, their business is like Spotify for art. And so they have, about 20,000 works of art that they've licensed from super high quality databases that scan images at crazy high resolutions. And then they have this sort of proprietary algorithm to figure out what people like, what kind of art that they really enjoy, and then of course their sort of display, which is highly customized for every artwork that shows up, which I think is really interesting. So.
Can they show you a sample? Could it be the sort of thing where all right, in the morning for an hour, we're going to show you a sample of a new piece, and if you like it, you can add it to your collection.
Yeah.
There's a cost associated with that. There's
a gesture control, so you can wave your hand across it, and it'll say, oh, I saw someone wave their hand, they must like this piece of artwork. It can suggest new things, and it can see what you like or don't like when it comes to art. This is really for people like me who. I really enjoy artwork, but I'm not going to go spend, hundreds of thousands of dollars on really nice pieces of art to hang in my house. I would totally spend $500 for a display that can display, 20,000, 30,000 different pieces of artwork. You can also upload your own artwork. So if you have, they're seeing a ton of business from wedding photographers. Instead of selling, these prints that you hang on your wall with big expensive frames, you buy one of these things. The wedding photographer says, hey, for whatever, $2,000, you can get this display with all my pictures that I took at your wedding, and they cycle through. People are finding that super compelling. And so they really care. Yeah, they want to sell the frame and make money on that. They really care about the content that they're building and monetizing that. And so that's a really big part of this business for Mural.
Cool.
Yeah. This is a business model which really comes much more in sort of industrial and sort of heavy duty sort of manufacturing settings, which is really around control. And we call it closing the loop, but there are probably a bunch of other people that are smarter than me that have other terms for it. This is, again, another portfolio company called Loci Controls. This is their product, which is ugly and not super interesting from the perspective of sexy consumer hardware, but is this big valve that gets mounted to wellheads at landfill, what are called gas to energy plants. More energy is generated from methane gas than all of photovoltaics in the country, which is astounding.
And that's methane gas that typically is escaping from these landfills where there's all kinds of organic material decomposing.
That's right. So the EPA requires them to drill these deep wells through the trash, and as the trash composes, the methane, which is pretty flammable and dangerous, is supposed to escape from this thing. They have from the trash, through the wellhead. And many of the larger landfills are required to actually burn off the methane because it's dangerous. And they do that by this big vacuum system that pulls in, all the methane. So you sort of see this is the wellhead coming out, and this is the vacuum system going back in. And then sometimes it'll go into a sort of gas turbine generator. And the way they measure that is they have a guy right now, and most of these landfills, they have a guy who walks around with a handheld meter that probably costs whatever, 50 grand or something. And he walks around once every 2 weeks and says, oh, this one's, has a bunch of gas, let's open the valve. Then he walks to the next one. This one's not doing so well, let's close the valve halfway. And they just walk around. It takes them a day, and they kind of do that, and they come back 2 weeks later. It turns out methane generation varies hugely depending on time of the cycle of the trash decomposing, heat, humidity, where it is in the landfill, et cetera, et cetera. And so these guys install a valve with a bunch of sensors on it in between the wellhead and the vacuum system. And it detects, hey, every 15 seconds, it says, hey, there's more gas coming out now than there was a little while ago. Let's open the valve a little bit more. And then, oh, there's a little bit more coming. Let's open a little bit more again. And it gives this feedback loop, which basically was not there before because it was a one-time sort of point solution for measurement. And because you have all this information, you can much better figure out how much gas is being generated, how much money you're making. It tracks sort of their financial progress as a company in terms of generating gas. So it just sort of changes the way many IoT sort of industrial companies focus on understanding really what's going on in their business or warehouse. So again, there's 100 companies that sort of fit into this category that we know of, but this is sort of one of the industries we find the most interesting. It's the least sexy, but I think the
sort of continual monitoring is part of this, right?
Yeah.
Of stuff that today is just periodically monitored.
Right. And there's a whole host of industries that most of which I don't know anything about that will go from having basically no intelligence to intelligence and then control automation.
Yeah. This reminds me of, there's a company, and I'm going to block on the name, but I bet you know it, that's doing a specialized drone-based system for golf courses, right? And so it's a drone that just sits in a box, and it takes off every couple days to see which parts of the golf course need more water.
Interesting.
And similar to this, that's a process that today the groundskeeper walks around or drives around in a cart and says like, hey, it looks like this area needs more water.
But it turns out if you use 100,000 gallons of water every month, that's a huge expense, and you much want to have a really good idea of how you're going to optimize that water expenditure. And so this is the same thing. This is a huge both sorts of revenue and cost for the landfill. And if they can have a better idea of how to monetize that and track it over time and look at what works and what doesn't, the structure of the industry really changes.
All right, so we should, before we keep going on with some of the other business models, if you have questions up to this point, feel free to enter them into the chat interface, and we'll take those as we go. But let's keep going because I suspect you have a couple more business models you want to touch on.
A few more. Okay, so data. This is again a fairly obvious one that I think we see a bunch of companies thinking about now. Again, 100 different companies you could point at. This is one of my favorites called Karma. They build this little sort of LTE wireless hotspot. So it sort of has Wi-Fi and an LTE modem in there. And they've built this structure around sort of you buy data just like you do for your sort of MiFi, Verizon, whatever thing, or your phone. The difference here is it really creates this marketplace around data. And so the reason it's called Karma is if you allow other people to use your data, you get that data back from the company. And so they've created this really interesting sort of system to move data around the network and sort of arbitrage how it gets priced. But their business model at the end of the day is not to sell these devices for $100, it's to sell data.
And this is a hotspot that like theoretically you take with you if you're going to a hotel or a conference center or something like that.
And the difference here is you can optionally open the network so it's public, and then people that use your data, your Karma, you get points back for that, which allow you to have more data. And so it creates this. The idea was, you want to make Wi-Fi ubiquitous, and this is a really compelling way to do it because it enables people to incentivize them to share data, whereas right now you're like, oh, it's my data, I don't want you to take it. And so I really love this sort of vision for this company. I think this is a very tough business, but they're really, again, optimizing the monetizing of data. You can, of course, look at Verizon and AT&T and T-Mobile as examples of this business model that have been around for a long time. They don't really care about selling phones that much. They really want to sell data. That's really what their business is based on, and that's new. 10 years ago that wasn't true. They really cared about minutes and calling time, which you could argue is data, but it's pretty different in terms of the way they monetize it. Advertising, I think probably the best known business model in the software world, which I think in the hardware world is pretty tough because people are often paying for a thing and they don't want to be advertised to. I think Kindle has a great example of this. If you've ever purchased a Kindle, you know that there's two options to buy any Kindle. There's, let's say you pay you pay $79 for the sort of base model Kindle, and if you don't want ads to show up on it when the screen is off, you have to pay more money. And so this is, again, another compelling way for Amazon to advertise to you.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about that mural display. Is that an in-home advertising?
They've been pretty strong about that.
They don't want
that's not because you don't really want to associate advertising with a lot of the kinds of things that you do in a normal life. And I think especially with art, you don't want to think of your thing that displays your art as advertising to you.
Yeah.
Amazon is uniquely qualified to do this because the e-paper display that's in the Kindle, it consumes no power when it's off. And so for basically no sort of energy or data cost, they can push an ad to you. And when it's off, it's displaying an ad instead of its screensaver or whatever. So it's a fairly compelling sort of use case. But I think this is actually a fairly small area of the Internet of Things sort of connected hardware space. I think it will become a little bit bigger, but I think business models will really not revolve around this because it tends to be the sort of cost benefit analysis of doing advertising with consumers after they've paid $100, $200, $300 for a product is usually not worth it. And these are sort of traditional consumer sort of component businesses, called baked-in business models. They're a little bit different, and I'll explain that in a minute. This is a company called Particle, and they build super easy to use sort of radio modules. And so this is their cell module that you can sort of embed in pretty much any product. So this is something that would be sold to companies that are building hardware and selling them to consumers. So they're sort of a B2B business. Their sales cycle is sort of a traditional component business, right? They have to be designed into products, and they have to really sort of get into the whole experience of becoming a major supplier and building hundreds of millions of units or whatever. So that part of their business is not very fun. What is really interesting about these guys is at the end of the day, they're really a software business. And so they have a sort of a data layer between the modem that sits on the consumer device or whoever, and the sort of management of those devices. And so they actually create this sort of dashboard where you can look at, who's using what data. They have an API that the companies can use to integrate to their own application, so they don't have to write all this sort of base layer code to make the sort of product work. It kind of works out of the box. And so even though this is in some ways a traditional sort of component business,
they're giving you information visibility of how are people using this component out in the world today.
That's right. And it's very hard to remove these companies. Once this is in your product, it's very hard to get rid of it. It also, once you've sort of seen the light of, oh my God, I can get all this information, why would I ever do it on my own? Or I can't, or I don't have the resources or whatever. So this is there's a handful of businesses that fit into this category. There will be many, many, many more that are sort of enabling traditional hardware companies to become more modern, more sort of software and data oriented without having to do a lot of heavy lifting on the sort of team and software side. Transactions. So in the payment space, we see a bunch of hardware companies. This is one of our favorites, a company called DipJar, based in New York. And they build, if you think about when you go to a sort of coffee shop or a charity event or whatever, and you want to give a donation or a tip, oftentimes you don't have cash on you anymore. At least I don't. Very rarely do I carry cash now. I think this is a big millennial thing. I think it's sort of going to take another 15, 20 years for that to really sort of work its way through the population. But I think cash is going way down in terms of the percentage of transactions. And so these guys build a tipping jar or a donations jar, but it's for credit cards. And so instead of having to throw $1 into a jar, you just dip your credit card. There's no button or interaction or signing or anything, and it just deducts $1 from your credit card, and then tips out to the baristas or the charity organization.
And can the person dipping their credit card change the value amount?
No. So
you set the value amount, and it might be when I go to the pet store, Unleash, there's always like the, do you want to donate,
That's right. So if it's the Jimmy Fund or whatever, they would say it's $5, and they would just make it $5. They can change it anytime they want, but it's not on a per user basis, it's on a per store basis.
Got it.
And so, and the reason for that is the psychological toll, believe it or not, of deciding what amount should I tip actually discourages people from tipping at all.
Yeah.
And so by making it a fixed transaction, it actually increases tipping, which is really
and I'm guessing transactions, since we were talking about the Amazon Echo before, it's built into that product too, right? That it's very easy to say, hey Alexa,
Totally.
add some paper towels to my
Of course, yeah.
Amazon order.
Yeah, and they make money. They want to incentivize transaction volume, right? So DipJar is focused on how do we get as many people to tip as much as possible over time.
Because they're taking a little slice out of every transaction.
That's right. They don't give a shit about how many jars there are. I mean, only in the sort of mission to have more people tip. They really care about the tipping. That's their sort of core metric. And so they really track that. That's their dashboard. That's how they monetize everything. And that's really their focus as a company. And again, there are, POS companies are probably, Square is probably the best example of companies like this. But there will be more and more companies that sort of fit into the payment stream that take a toll every time a dollar runs through it. And I think last but not least, actually, no, I think we have two more, is one that I think a lot of folks have talked about before and asked about hardware as a service. And so there are a whole bunch of companies that fit into this category. I think Meraki is probably the best known of them. This is a company that builds these sort of really modern internet-connected network infrastructure. The company was bought by Cisco, I think about 2 years ago for about $800 million. You sort of almost came out of nowhere from many folks' perspective. They build, the products that you see here and a whole bunch of others that are really, as far as enterprise hardware go, very sexy, well-designed, sort of integrated products that all fit together and work together and are really easy to use. We use it here at both of our offices, and it's fantastic. They do sell the hardware. They do make some money on that sale, but what they really care about is a licensing fee that you pay every year. And so you might pay whatever, $2,000 for one of these switches, and then every year you have to pay another $1,000 to keep the software platform running.
Oh, interesting. So not for support, but to keep they're continually updating the software and making it better in some noticeable way?
That's the idea. Yeah, I can't notice it. And so
But you write the check anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it, you see every once in a while they'll send you an email on this new feature that we just launched or whatever.
Yeah.
They give firmware updates and all these other things, and it's all this really beautiful experience that you don't have to think about. So if you've ever managed a network at any company, anywhere, or even your home, it's a huge pain in the ass. These guys just basically take the pain out of that process. And so that's really what you're paying for. They monetize that by a software licensing fee, which winds up being way more expensive over time than the hardware itself. And so this is really, in theory, they could not charge at all for the hardware. I think in the beginning they actually did that, and they realized actually people would be happy to pay, market rate for network hardware. We're just going to keep charging them the software fee anyway. So this is sort of the hardware as a service business model, which is going to become more and more prevalent over time.
All right, I have a question about that, but I want to leave it till the end here.
Great. This is again a very traditional business model, which is changing in a couple of ways. It's sort of the traditional upsell, which is very common if you run a hardware business. This is probably my favorite example. It's a company based in Seattle called 53. And they build the product on the top, or they started with the product on the top, which is this really awesome iPad drawing app for architects and sort of sketchers and artists. And they have all these different tools, and it's just really well designed, and you can share your artwork and everything. And that's free. And you download that. You can sort of add stuff to it. You can buy brushes and different colors and swatches and stuff. And then about 2 years into the life of that company, they decided that they really wanted a better instrument to actually, rather than use your finger to draw on the iPad, they actually wanted a sort of stylus, but the iPad at the time didn't have one. And so they created something that's actually ironically called the Pencil, which Apple, I think, stole, which I find interesting. And that is, not cheap. I think it's $60 or $70 for the basic version. They have different sort of colors and finishes. Has a little eraser head on the backside.
What do you mean that Apple stole it?
Well, Apple has a stylus now for the iPad Pro called the Pencil.
Oh, interesting.
I'm not sure if there's some licensing thing there because I feel like stylus and pencil would be trademarked, but
yeah,
I don't know. I'm not really sure. And so this is sort of you are getting customers into your sort of ecosystem as a company by giving away something for free. This is sort of like the freemium version of hardware. People use that, they love it, and then you can upsell them onto a piece of hardware. And this is, again, a fairly new business model in certain ways, but they're also traditional upsells of accessories and other things that companies have been doing for years. And we're going to see more and more companies that fit into this category too. And last but not least is probably our favorite business model, which is a sort of Keurig-like business model, which is a sort of consumable business model. And I make a big point here. This is not razors and blades, which something I think people really confuse. They're psychologically very different. When you buy a razor or and a blade or a filter or something that you have to buy, it's this painful, yuck, I don't want to do that. When I have to go buy ink for a printer, it's psychologically negative. It's a thing I have to do in order to make the thing that I already bought work, which is not a thing that consumers like. when you interview people that buy Keurig K-Cups or Nespresso pods or whatever, and you say, what's your emotional state when you purchase this thing? It's not negative. It's, I want the coffee. Like the reason I bought the machine is to have the coffee. And so it's not, it's, again, it sounds semantic, but it's actually psychologically totally different. People are excited to go to the store and pick out their type of coffee that they want, espresso or whatever. And that really changes the perception. And so I think I use Cuvée here. Yep. So I use one of our companies called Cuvée. They build this connected sort of wine platform built around this bottle that you see in the middle. They don't really care about the bottle. They really care about the wine that goes into the bottle, which comes in these cartridges, 750 milliliter cartridges, which I don't think are pictured there. They make 40 points of margin or so on every bottle of wine that they sell. And they enable this sort of direct-to-consumer wine business, which has been traditionally really hard for most vineyards to build. And so, again, when you are buying a Cuvée bottle of wine, you're not thinking, oh, God, I have to get this thing to make the bottle work. It's I want the wine. I want to pick out the Sauvignon Blanc or the Pinot or whatever, and that is the part of the experience that you're really excited about. And so I think this is, while this is probably, of all the businesses we talked about, this is probably the most difficult to build from the perspective of a startup. It's also the most lucrative because if you can get sort of over the hurdle of actually building the company, you create this extremely sticky experience where the customers are really focused on the product that you sell, the sort of distribution of the wine or the coffee or the pool chemicals or whatever the thing may be that you continually sell. That's what they want. Yeah. And so if you can get people to love that part of the product, you're in really good shape. I think that's the last one.
Yep. All right, cool.
Yeah.
So again, before we wrap up, if you have any questions, you can use the chat interface there. I have a couple that I wanted to ask, but I'll give preference to you. And I don't know if there are people that are dialed in. We can unmute you if you want to ask a question by phone. Let me try that just for a second to see if anybody's dialed in on the phone. I think you're unmuted, so you could unmute yourself and ask a question if you'd like. GoToMeeting is always a fun experiment to see.
I thought you'd be all cool with the Mercat or the whatever streaming cool thing is hip these days.
Is that a new webcasting?
I think there's
platform?
All these live thing, Facebook Live and sort of.
Yeah,
this is not my world.
We should be doing Facebook Live. Let me just ask two questions before we wrap up. Then, question number one is about what do you think happened to the Keurig business model for Keurig?
It's a good question. I think, yeah.
Just so people haven't been following, so the K-Cups went off patent. Other people started producing K-Cups. Keurig got worried, I think, about what would happen to their K-Cup sales if anyone could make a K-Cup. So they sort of tried to introduce DRM for coffee, where the K-Cup brewer, the new brewers, the Keurig 2.0, would only brew their special K-Cups. People got really upset. They tried to do an end run around it. Keurig's now owned by a private equity company. It had been this phenomenal stock market success story. So what's your read on all of that?
Oh God, we can't have people, brewing coffee on their machines or their custom coffee on the Keurig machines was really the problem. It was a problem of fear, and it's really unfortunate because I think they had an opportunity to create a marketplace around coffee, and I think they really stumbled around trying to own. It's my experience. I want to protect that experience. And I think consumers are actually pretty sensitive to DRM. I think a lot of the streaming music and other things that people tried to impose, you'll notice most of that's gone. And I think that they really, consumers want to feel like if they spend money on a thing, it's theirs and they can do with it how they please. Yeah. And any company coming in and saying no, they really dislike that. And so while I don't have all the answers, my view is that Keurig would have been much better sort of suited to really think about it as a marketplace, and how is there a way that we can actually enable more people to transact and sell coffee? And let's get whatever, any random company that wants to copy our pods, let's get them to work with the pod even better so that we can sell stuff back and forth. Maybe it's a little overly sort of optimistic. But I think that companies that have done really well with sort of incentivizing people to come to their platform typically do better over time.
Yeah. Well, and it would be interesting, I guess, to observe that Keurig is not really a connected product, right? You plug it into electricity, but it's not connected to your home network. So I think unlike the Cuvée wine bottle, which I think is connected to your home Wi-Fi, right? The company can get data about what are people buying, what are they drinking, how often.
But I think that there was a new Keurig machine that came out with the DRM stuff that was connected and you could control with your phone, which I don't actually find that compelling. What I would find really compelling is, hey, can you tell me more about this coffee? Like who grew this coffee? You know, how long has it been in the supply chain even? You know, what are other coffees that are similar to this coffee? What kind of coffees do I actually like? What kind of flavors are really interesting to me? So they had this whole opportunity, I think, around sort of enriching the customer experience. And I think they went more the route of we want to control the customer experience. And, oh, here's an app that you can use to control your phone to brew your coffee, which I don't really think is that compelling. It's unfortunately what many big companies do when they see, oh, we want to have a connected product, let's make an app. And that's the sort of thought process, which is really unfortunate because it's oftentimes the app is actually the wrong thing to do. You know, Cuvée, we spent a lot of time when we were building the product. Like they wanted to initially have a phone that connects to a bottle that you pair and then you like look at. And I found that really, in the testing that we did, it was really uncompelling. You don't want to like sit here doing this. It's like this really weird. It takes you away from the moment. And so I think building the software experience around enabling the consumer to have a better experience, whether that's an app on the phone or something digitally embedded or no app at all. That's really the way you should think about it, not let's have an app. You know?
And the last question I wanted to ask was just about, you know, you talked about the subscription model earlier. You know, do people at some point, I can't tell if I'm just a cheapskate or if there are lots of people like me, and, you know, do people at some point get subscription fatigue? And they just sort of look at, like with the Canary security camera that I was testing, it's like they will sell you some extra storage. And I don't know, I'm just very careful about, you know, what other $3 a month, $5 a month, $10 a month services do I sign up for? Because I know that once I sign up, I will forget about it for a couple of years.
It's a great question, and I think again it comes a lot back to sort of psychology and how people think. I always tell this story to a lot of our companies. People are really comfortable buying hardware, and they understand I'm going to go to a store and I'm going to pay for this thing, and I'm going to get the thing, and that's it. And that purchase behavior has been ingrained in our brains for thousands of years, tens of thousands of years. I don't even know. I don't know where people started buying stuff, but it's been basically since the advent of currency. You know, you were buying stuff that existed in the physical world. I know, like I remember signing up for Spotify, which I love Spotify. I use it every day. It is a huge part of my life. There's no day that goes without me turning my Spotify on first thing in the morning, listening to music, turning it off at night. It's a huge part of my life. I remember signing up for the premium Spotify thing where I didn't have to listen to ads, and I remember being like, oh, $9 a month, really? Is that really worth it? And it's cheaper than one album. And it's you like kind of step back like, why am I so sensitive to that? And I think it's because you are really not used to paying money and not getting a thing. That's perceptual. I remember that same day going to Amazon and spending like $60 on like random shit that I need. Like I need paper towels and like soup or something, whatever. I don't remember what it was, but you don't even think about it. And so I find that like subscription friction is actually really high. And we have almost no companies that actually do that. It's all around, like when you sign up for Cuvée, you don't get a subscription to their wine. You say, hey, I want that bottle of wine, I'm going to buy it. And then you buy it, and then it comes right to your door. And so I think that with the exception of data, which I think is something that people really do understand perceptually, the recurring sort of subscription service is actually, I think, pretty hard for many consumers to swallow. I mean, the number of recurring services I pay for on a monthly basis is actually pretty small, at least outside of the work world. It's probably two or three.
Okay, so you're careful about it too. It's not just me where like, I hate to see recurring charges and notice it's something that I don't really feel like is delivering a lot of value.
It's very common, and I think that there's actually a very high bar to get over in order to beat that. I think in the enterprise world, that's very different. Like we have tons of subscription things that we pay for Amazon and Squarespace and whatever, all the things that we have to buy.
That are just the cost of running a business, and you're happy to not have a piece of hardware that you know that you need to worry about.
That sort of business psychology, I think, is really divorced from the personal psychology of like, oh my God, I can't dare to spend another $9 a month on the thing, even if I love that thing and use it all the time.
Yeah. All right. Well, this is just a last call for questions before we wrap up. If you want to post them to the chat interface here. Also, before you sign off, I just want to mention we're wrapping up this week. We did a survey on IoT and connected products for big company executives. We're going to have the results of that ready for you within the next few weeks, certainly by early August. So you'll want to make sure you're signed up for the Innovation Leader email, and we'll let you know when those are out. And you can sign up for the email, I think, at the bottom of pretty much any page at innovationleader.com. It looks like we have no questions here, so I want to say thanks to Ben for letting us join him at Bolt for this presentation. Thanks to all of you for tuning in, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon. Thanks a lot. Have a great day.
Thanks.